The world's biggest serial killer might never have been caught if he had known how to use a computer. Imagine someone committing serial killings who is also the friend of his own victims, a well-known figure in the town, and on top of that, a doctor. This is the astonishing story of Dr. Harold Shipman, who didn't use his clinic to save lives, but to take them. In the small town of Hyde, England, with a population of just 30,000, Shipman carried out serial killings right under everyone's noses for 23 years. Even after putting more than 250 people to death, no one suspected Dr. Harold Shipman. And they likely never would have, had he not made one small mistake. What was the reason behind these killings? Why wasn't he caught for such a long time, and what clue did the police find that exposed decades of murders in a single moment? Welcome again, viewers, to the story of Dr. Harold Shipman. He ran a clinic in Hyde, a small town near Manchester, England, with a population of around 30,000. Of these, 3,000 people were his patients. Dr. Shipman mostly targeted elderly patients who lived alone and whose deaths would not raise suspicions. He would give these patients a lot of attention, even visiting them at home, listening to their troubles, and giving them a sense of comfort. These patients felt they had someone who cared about them, and some even trusted him enough to give him keys to their homes. Because of this demeanor, Shipman became well known in Hyde, with many believing that he could treat the elderly just by talking to them. But behind this facade, Shipman would extract information from his patients, who lived alone, how much wealth they had, and who their relatives were. Once he was confident, he would kill his patients by giving them a fatal overdose of medicine. Since these patients were already over 80 years old, their deaths raised no suspicion. This went on for years, with no one even suspecting him, until he made a critical mistake. Dr. Shipman began his career in a town called Pontefract, 70 kilometers from Hyde, where he worked at a hospital. In 1974, he moved to Todmorden, where he joined the Abraham Ormerod Medical Center as a general practitioner. While working there, he was caught prescribing large quantities of a drug called pethidine, which he was using himself. Pethidine is a painkiller, but it also has addictive properties. Shipman had become addicted to it and would intentionally prescribe it to his patients, using most of it himself. When he was caught, the hospital administration fired him, and his medical license was in jeopardy. However, Shipman paid a £600 fine and admitted himself to a rehabilitation center, thus avoiding the cancellation of his license. After spending some time in rehab and once people had forgotten about him, he moved to Hyde in 1977 and joined the Donnybrook Medical Center as a general practitioner. He continued practicing as a GP throughout the 1980s without giving up his addiction or the opportunity to murder elderly patients. However, the frequency of the killings increased after 1993 when he opened his own clinic in Hyde and gained a good reputation in the town. For several years, everything went on as usual, with no one suspecting anything. It was not until March 1998 that Dr. Linda Reynolds, who worked at a nearby hospital opposite Shipman's clinic, raised concerns about the high death rate among his patients. She pointed out that for someone running such a small clinic, Shipman's patient death rate was unusually high. In the past 3 months, 16 of Drive Shipman's patients had died. During the same period, at Brook Surgery, which had 3 times more patients than Shipman's clinic, only 14 patients passed away. Suspicion increased further when it was discovered that all 16 of Drive Shipman's patients had been cremated, not buried. Most Christians traditionally bury their loved ones, and only a few opt for cremation. Dr. Linda expressed her concerns in a report to the Manchester coroner, detailing that most of Dr. Shipman's 16 patients were elderly women who were found dead in their homes. It seemed too much of a coincidence that most of these patients had died while Dr. Shipman was alone with them. Dr. Linda pointed out that deaths from illness typically occur in bed, but Dr. Shipman's patients were often found dead sitting in a chair, fully dressed. Dr. Shipman was either present at the time of their death or was the first to arrive and declare them deceased, which was highly unusual. Based on this report, an investigation was initiated, but the police couldn't find any concrete evidence against Dr. Shipman, and the investigation was closed after a month. When Shipman's patients died, he would personally sign the medical forms, including the cause of death. The problem was that Form C, which required a second doctor's signature, was often signed by his friends or colleagues who didn't suspect him. This allowed Shipman to falsify the death certificates and cremate the bodies without raising suspicion. As a result, many deaths went uninvestigated, and Shipman continued to hide his crimes. After the investigation was closed, Shipman killed 3 more people, but his time of getting caught was approaching. His final victim was Kathleen Grundy, the former mayor of Hyde, who died in her home at the age of 81 on June 20, 1998. Dr. Shipman was the last person to see her alive and later signed her death certificate, stating old age as the cause of death. Kathleen's daughter, Angela Woodruff, a lawyer, grew suspicious of her mother's sudden death when she found a will in which her mother had left her home to Dr. Shipman. Though Dr. Shipman was close to the family, Angela was suspicious because her mother had 2 houses, but the will mentioned only one. This indicated that the will was forged by someone unaware of the second property, likely Dr. Shipman. Angela approached the police, who reopened the investigation. Kathleen's body was exhumed and tested, revealing high levels of diamorphine, commonly known as heroin. When questioned by the police, Dr. Shipman claimed Kathleen was an addict and had recorded this in his medical notes. However, it was found that Dr. Shipman had made these entries after her death. He was unaware that the computer automatically saved the last edit date, which showed the entry was made posthumously. This discovery was not enough to arrest Shipman, but the police also found a typewriter in his possession that was used to forge the will. The typewriter had specific faulty characters that matched those in the forged document. On September 7, 1998, Dr. Harold Shipman was arrested. After his arrest, several other families came forward, suspecting that Shipman had killed their loved ones, but they hadn't spoken up due to his high standing in the community. The police investigated 15 more deaths connected to Shipman. In all these cases, a similar pattern emerged. Shipman would administer a lethal dose of diamorphine, sign the death certificate himself, and record old age as the cause of death. He also encouraged cremation to destroy any evidence. During the inquiry, all the cases of patients who died under Shipman's care were re-examined. The inquiry team reviewed death certificates, medical records, and interviewed the families of Shipman's patients. Some bodies were also exhumed for forensic postmortems. This detailed investigation revealed that from 1975 until his capture, Shipman had murdered a confirmed 218 patients. This number could be as high as 260, but the lack of evidence in some cases prevented confirmation. Shipman was sentenced to life imprisonment for 15 murders. The court declared that he would never be released. However, in 2004, Shipman hanged himself in his prison cell using bedsheets. After his death, a fellow inmate revealed that Shipman had confessed to killing not 218 or 260 people, but 508 in total. Despite this, the real motive behind Shipman's mass murders remains unclear. Some believe he was a psychopath, others suggest it was for financial gain, and some theorize that it was linked to his mother's death. His mother, a cancer patient, was given morphine for pain relief, and experts speculate that Shipman may have been trying to replicate that experience by watching his patients die in a similar way.